If you search for project management interview questions online, you'll find the same list everywhere. Tell me about yourself. How do you handle scope creep? Describe your experience with Agile. And if that's all you're preparing for, you're going to walk into an IT project management interview very underprepared, because the questions that actually matter, the ones that separate candidates who understand the work from candidates who just studied for it, those don't show up on the standard list. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 20 IT project management interview questions, the common ones, the technical ones, and the ones that most people don't see coming. For each one, I'll give you the answer framework a hiring manager is actually looking for. And by the end of this video, you'll have a complete picture of what an IT PM interview actually looks like and actually tests. So let's get into it. First, I just want to make it clear that IT project management interviews, they're not testing whether you know what a Gantt chart is. They're actually testing whether you can operate inside complex technical environments where requirements change, where engineers push back, where stakeholders don't understand the technology, and where the timeline is always under pressure. That's a different kind of interview than a general project management interview, and most candidates prepare the wrong way. They just start memorizing definitions, they rehearse textbook answers about risk registers and stakeholder matrices, but when an interviewer asks something like, hey, how do you manage a project when the technical team tells you the original estimate was wrong by 3 months? They just freeze up. And the thing is, it's because that's not a theory question. It's an experience question. And the way you answer it tells the hiring manager everything they need to know about whether you've actually operated inside a real project environment or if you're just someone who's just memorized a textbook. So that's what this video is going to be built around, not just the questions, but the thinking behind the actual answers. Now, to understand what ITPM interviews are actually testing, you need to understand what the job actually requires. An IT project manager sits in the middle of everything. You're coordinating between business stakeholders who have requirements, technical teams who are doing the work, and vendors who are delivering components, and leadership who just wants status updates. None of those groups speak the same language, and none of them have the same priorities. Your job is to keep the project moving forward despite that. So when a hiring manager interviews you, they're not asking you whether you know the PMB okay. They're asking, hey, can this person operate in that environment? Can they communicate with a developer without needing to be a developer? Can they manage a sponsor's expectations when the project is behind? Can they run a meeting that actually produces a solid decision? That's what the interviewer is trying to gauge, and that's what the interview is designed to surface. And here's the most interesting part. Most of the questions they ask are not complicated on the surface, but the answers that land with the interviewer, the answers that make a hiring manager think, hey, this person gets it, those require you to understand the work at a deeper level than most candidates do. And so that's what we're going to be building towards in this video. Now let's get into the actual questions. And I'll give you a quick framework that you can use when you're answering these questions so you know how to approach the questions that come up. The difference between a good answer and a great answer in a PM interview is not more information, it's judgment. A good answer tells the interviewer what you would do. A great answer tells them how you think and why. Anyone can say, hey, I would communicate clearly with stakeholders, but the candidates who get hired say something different. They say, hey, when I'm dealing with stakeholders who have unrealistic timeline expectations, I don't just push back, I bring them into the data. I show them the dependencies. I let the project reality do the work, not my opinion. That answer demonstrates operational thinking and tells the hiring manager that this person has been in that room before, or at a minimum that they actually understand the real dynamics of the work. So as you go through these 20 questions, don't just memorize the answers, try to internalize the thinking behind them. And that's what will actually help you move forward in the room. Here's a quick example of what I mean by that. So there's two candidates that interview for the same IT project manager role. And let's say the interviewer asks, hey, how do you handle a situation where key stakeholder keeps changing the requirements late in the project? Candidate one might say something like, hey, I would refer back to the project charter, remind them of the scope that we agreed to, and I would use a change control mechanism to manage any new requests. See, technically this is correct, but it's completely forgettable. Candidate two might say something like this, which is a lot more convincing. They might say something like, hey, so that situation usually tells me something broke down earlier in the project. Either the requirements were not clearly documented up front, or that the stakeholder didn't feel heard during the planning phase and is now trying to correct course through scope change. So I start by understanding what's actually driving that behavior. Then I try to address the root cause while managing the process. See, same question, just a very different signal that you're giving off to the interviewer. The first candidate answered from a textbook. The second candidate answered from experience, or at least from a deeper understanding of how these things actually happen in real life. That's the difference between an answer that gets you to the next round or one that ends your candidacy very quickly. So just keep that in mind as we move through these 20 questions. The goal isn't to memorize what I'm saying here. The goal is to understand the thinking behind the answers. We're going to put these questions into groups. So the first group of questions will be the foundation questions. These are the ones that everyone expects, but most people just give generic answers to these. So question 1, walk me through how you manage a project from start to finish. This is almost always one of the first questions that you might get, and most candidates just try to rush through it. What the interviewer is actually trying to test here is they want to see if you understand the full project life cycle, not just the execution phase. They want to know all of it. A strong answer would move through 4 clear phases. Initiation, where you establish a product charter, understand the business objectives, identify the stakeholders, and clarify scope. Then you move into planning, where you build the project plan, you define the milestones, you identify the risks, you set the communication cadence, and you align the team. Execution and monitoring, where you're running status meetings, you're tracking progress against the plan, you're managing issues, and you're communicating with stakeholders. And then closing, where you confirm the deliverables are accepted, you document the lessons learned, and you formally close the project out. Here's a quick key detail that separates a strong answer. Mention that you treat the closing phase very seriously. Most junior candidates might skip it, but a mention that you pay extra attention to how you close out a project can signal maturity. Question number 2, how do you handle scope creep? Everyone gets this question, but most answer it the same way. What an interviewer is testing here is, can you manage scope without damaging relationships? A weak answer might say something like, hey, I pushed back, and I remind them that this is what we agreed to. A strong answer says that scope creep is a process problem, not a people problem. And the best way to handle it is to build the right foundation up front. A clearly documented scope, an approved change control process, and stakeholders who understand from day one that changes have a cost, either in time or in budget or possibly both. When a request comes in mid-project, you don't reject it emotionally. You actually run it through the change control process. You document the request, assess the impact, you present the trade-offs, and let the sponsor decide with full information. That answer will help show that you have process maturity. Question number 3, how do you prioritize when everything feels urgent? This is a judgment question dressed as a process question. What they're actually testing here is, can you operate under pressure without losing structure? The honest answer is that not everything is actually urgent. Part of your job is to cut through that noise. A strong answer introduces a simple framework. You evaluate based on 2 things, business impact and dependency. What will break something else if it's delayed? What has the highest consequence if it slips? You also mentioned that you surface priority conflicts to the right stakeholders rather than making unilateral decisions about what matters most. That will signal a good operating judgment. Question number 4, describe a time where a project went off track and what you did to bring it back on track. This is a behavior question, and it's a trap for candidates who try to sound perfect. What they're testing is self-awareness, is problem solving, is composure under pressure. So don't say things like, hey, your project never goes off track, because every experienced PM knows that projects go off track and they always have a story. A strong answer follows a simple structure. Briefly explain the situation, explain what caused the issue, be specific, then explain the steps that you took to recover, how you assessed the damage, how you communicated with stakeholders, and the adjustment that you made to the plan. The most important part, what you actually learned from the outcome. Question number 5, how do you run a productive status meeting? What they're testing here is operational habits. Someone who runs a bad meeting slows everything down. A strong answer here covers 3 things. Structure. Every status meeting has a consistent format, updates issues, decisions that are needed, nothing else. Discipline. So you keep it time boxed. Anything that requires deep problem solving gets scheduled separately. Status meetings are not for debating, they're for status. And then number 3, you follow through. You send a concise meeting summary with decisions that are made and action items that are assigned within the next 24 hours. That answer tells the interviewer that, hey, this person actually runs meetings. And the more specific you get, the more you'll separate yourself from other candidates who are answering a question like that. Second group of questions we'll look at are more IT specific questions. And these test whether you understand technical environment that you'll be operating in. So question number 6, what is the difference between Agile and Waterfall? And when do you use each? This is standard, but how you answer it reveals your depth. What they're testing here is that, do you understand that methodology is a tool, not a religion? A strong answer is practical. Waterfall works well when requirements are fixed and well understood up front. So think things like infrastructure upgrades, compliance implementations, hardware rollouts, upgrades. Agile works really well when requirements are likely to evolve over time. So think like software development, product development, any kind of build, anything where you have like a feedback loop. The stronger move usually on this question is that you mentioned that most real IT projects nowadays are hybrid. You might plan in a structured way, but then you execute in sprints. You adapt the methodology to the project, not the other way around. That nuance there is what separates someone who's operated in real environments from someone who's just memorized definitions. Question number 6, how do you work effectively with technical teams when you're not the developer? This question trips up a lot of candidates who try to oversell their technical knowledge. What they're testing is, can you lead without needing to be the expert? A strong answer is honest and confident. You don't need to write code to manage a software project, but yes, you do need to understand enough to have credible conversations. You make it your responsibility to learn the basics, the architecture, the dependencies, the terminology the team uses. And then you ask good questions. You listen carefully when the team raises technical concerns, and you treat that information as project intelligence. You also do your best to protect the team from unnecessary interruptions. You're the buffer between leadership's questions and the engineer's focus time. That's one of the most valuable things that you can do as a PM. Question number 8, what does a typical IT project lifecycle look like? This is a knowledge question, but the answer reveals how much you've actually operated in IT environments. What they're testing is, do you understand the real stages of an enterprise IT project? A strong answer walks through requirements gathering, design, architecture review, development or configuration, testing phases like unit, integration and UAT testing, deployment planning, go live, and then post-implementation planning and support. And don't forget to mention the go, no-go decision point before deployment. That's a real moment in enterprise IT projects where the PM actually has to synthesize input from multiple teams and make a recommendation to leadership. Candidates who mention that have clearly been in the environment, and so if you can do that, you'll stand out from the rest. Question number 9, how do you manage a project when requirements are unclear or consistently changing? This is one of the most realistic questions on an IT project because unclear requirements are extremely common. What they're testing is, can you create structure in ambiguous situations? A weak answer tries to pretend this doesn't happen or says that you would just kind of get clarity up front. A strong answer acknowledges the reality. Requirements change. Your job is to build a process that absorbs that. So you can use iterative planning cycles. So here you can use iterative planning, short cycles that allow for adjustment. You document what is known and explicitly flag what is unknown. You hold checkpoints with stakeholders rather than assuming everything is already locked in. And critically, you make sure that scope changes go through a process even in a fluid environment. Agile does not mean no structure. It just means structured flexibility. Question number 10 is, how do you manage vendor relationships in an IT project? This is a question most junior candidates have not thought about deeply, and it can show very quickly. What they're testing here is enterprise IT projects almost always involve vendors. Can you manage that relationship professionally? A strong answer will cover 4 things. Clarity of contract and deliverables. You know exactly what was agreed to and you track against it. Communication cadence. You establish regular touch points and don't wait for problems to surface. And number 3, issue escalation. You have a documented path for raising problems on both sides before they become a crisis. And number 4, relationship management. You treat vendor teams as partners, not just order takers. The quality of work often reflects the quality of the relationship. These third group of questions that we're going to ask and answer are stakeholder and communication questions. These will test the importance of soft skills in project management, typically managing people with competing interests. So question number 11, how do you manage stakeholder expectations when the project is behind? This is where a lot of candidates give a generic answer about being transparent. What they're testing here is the actual mechanics of delivering bad news professionally. A strong answer is specific. You don't wait for the weekly status update to tell stakeholders that the project is off. You tell them early, you tell them privately, and you provide a recovery plan before you tell them or when you're telling them. This sequence matters a lot. You need to assess the situation, understand the full impact, develop options for recovery, then communicate. Hey, here's what happened, here's why it happened, here are the options, here's what I recommend. Coming with solutions instead of just a problem is what separates a credible PM from one who just reports bad news. Question number 12, how do you communicate technical risks to non-technical stakeholders? This is one of the most valuable skills an IT PM can have, and most candidates don't answer it well. What they're testing here is your ability to translate. Can you take something complex and make it relevant to a business audience? A strong answer focuses on business impact, not technical detail. A non-technical executive does not need to understand why a database migration is complex. They need to understand what happens if it fails and what you're doing to prevent it. When you translate technical risks into business language, you're making their lives easier. For example, hey, this technical risk means that we're going to have to delay our go live, or that there's going to be a cost overrun, or there's a compliance exposure, or there's a customer impact. Those are the terms that will help land with executive. You should also mention during the interview that you simplify it without necessarily dumbing it down. See, executives are intelligent. They just don't have the technical context all the time. And so your job is to give them the right information to make the right decisions. Question number 13 is describe a time you have to manage a conflict between a team member or a stakeholder. What they're testing here is interpersonal maturity and operational composure. The most important thing here is do not frame the story as you winning and someone else losing. A strong answer positions you as a facilitator who helped two parties find a workable solution. You identified the root of the disagreement, which is often a difference in priorities, not in personalities. You created a space for both sides to be heard. You kept the project objective as the reference point, and the resolution should feel collaborative, not something that you forced. Question number 14, how do you get buy-in from stakeholders who are resistant to the project? This is a sophisticated question, and most candidates answer it too simply. What they're testing here is political awareness and influence without authority. A strong answer starts by understanding the resistance before trying to overcome it. Is this person afraid of change? Do they feel excluded from the decision? Do they have a legitimate concern that's not being addressed? So you need to go first into listening mode. You need to ask questions to understand their position. Only then can you bring them closer to the project, not farther away. You involve them in relevant decision making. You make their input visible. You address their concerns directly. Resistance often dissolves when people feel heard and included. And so that's like the real answer that you need to give on the interview. The fourth group of questions are problem situation questions. They will test how you perform when things go wrong, which they always do. Question 15. So what do you do when the technical team tells you the original estimate was wrong by several months? This is one of the most realistic and challenging questions in an ITPM interview. What they're testing is crisis management and stakeholder communication under pressure. A weak answer panics. A strong answer has a process. So first, you validate. Is this a true estimate revision, or is it a preliminary signal? You have a direct conversation with the technical lead to understand the full picture before doing anything else. Second, you assess the impact. What does this mean for the project timeline? What does it mean for the budget? What does it mean for the business commitments that we already have? Third, you develop options. Can you phase out the deliverables? Can you reduce the scope? Can you increase resources? You need to walk into the conversation with stakeholders with choices, not just a problem. Fourth, you communicate early with the full picture and a recommendation. The candidates that answer as well have already been in that room, and they know how to cater the response so that everyone knows you've got everything under control. Question number 16, how do you handle a situation where a key team member leaves mid-project? What they're testing here is continuity planning and your ability to adapt. A strong answer covers the immediate response and the longer-term stabilization plan. So immediately you assess the knowledge gap. What did this person own? Is it documented? Who can absorb the work in the short term? Then you escalate to leadership with a clear picture of the risk and your proposed response. This is not a decision that you will make alone. Longer term, this is a lesson in why documentation and knowledge transfer matter throughout a project, not just at the end. A strong answer connects the situation back to a practice that you now build into every project, which is documentation early on, knowledge transfer early on. Question number 17, what would you do in your first 30 days as a new project manager at a company? Most candidates treat this as a soft question, but it actually isn't. What they're testing here is your onboarding instincts and your professional judgment. A strong answer here is structured. In the first 30 days, you are in listen and learn mode. Week 1, you're understanding the landscape. You're meeting your key stakeholders. You're understanding current projects. You're learning the tools and processes that the organization uses. Week 2, you're going deeper. You're identifying where the pain points are. You're understanding what's working and what isn't. You're building relationships with your team. Weeks 3 and week 4, you begin forming an informed point of view now. Where can you add immediate value? What gaps exist already? Start demonstrating reliability through small, consistent actions. The instinct to observe before changing things signals professional maturity. That's what this answer is really demonstrating. The fifth group of questions are questions that most candidates don't see coming. These are the ones that reveal real operational thinking. Question 18, what is the difference between a risk and an issue, and how do you manage both? This sounds like a terminology question, but it actually isn't. What they're testing here is whether you manage projects proactively or reactively. A risk is something that might happen. An issue is something that has already happened. A strong answer will go beyond the definition. You actively maintain a risk register throughout the project, not as a document, but as a living management tool. You review it regularly. You assign owners to risks. You have a mitigation strategy documented before the risk actually materializes. Issues go into an issue log with an owner and a resolution plan and a target resolution date. The candidate who can speak to both and treat them as active management tools demonstrate real project discipline. Question number 19, how do you close out a project properly? Almost no one prepares for this question, and hiring managers notice very quickly. What they're testing is, do you understand that project close is a real phase with real deliverables? A weak answer may say something like, hey, you make sure everything is done and hand it off. A strong answer covers, hey, formal acceptance of deliverables from the client or sponsor, transition to operations or support, documentation of lessons learned, release of project and financial resources, and a post-implementation review. The lessons learned piece is especially important. This is how organizations get better over time. A PM who takes it seriously signals professional maturity that most candidates lack. Question number 20, what is the most important thing a project manager does that most people don't realize? This is the most open-ended question on the list, and it's designed to see how you think about the role. There's no single right answer, but there are weak answers. A weak answer says communication or keeping everyone on the same page, but that's too generic. A strong answer is specific and reveals real understanding of the work. Here's one way to answer it. The most important thing a project manager does is create clarity where there is none. Projects involve ambiguity, competing priorities, stakeholders with different agendas, teams working with incomplete information, timelines that shift. The PM's job is to cut through all of that and maintain a clear picture of what needs to happen and who owns it, and what, if anything, stands in the way. That clarity is what keeps the project moving. And it doesn't come from a tool or from a methodology. It comes from the judgment and discipline of the person running the project. That answer will probably land much better with the interviewer. Now, before I close this out, let me give you a few things that you can act on immediately. So first, audit your answers against what I just shared. Go back through the 20 questions in this video and record yourself answering each one. Then listen back with one question in mind. Does this answer sound like someone who understands the work or someone who's memorized the definition? If it sounds like the latter, dig deeper and add a real example, add the reasoning behind the answer, make it specific. Second, build your story bank. Most behavioral questions like the describe a time when question requires that you draw from real experience. So before your interview, write down 5 to 7 project situations that you've been a part of, a timeline change, a stakeholder conflict, a scope change, a team issue, a project that recovered from a setback. And you need to know these stories like the back of your hand. They become your raw material for almost every behavioral question that you'll face. Third, learn the language of the environment. If you're interviewing for an IT PM role specifically, understand the tools and terminology common in enterprise IT projects. Jira, ServiceNow, Confluence, Microsoft Project, Change Advisory Board, UAT, Go Live Planning. These are the terminologies that will help you stick out in an interview. Now, you don't need to be an expert, but you should be able to speak to the language fluently enough that the interviewer doesn't have to explain basic concepts to you. And fourth, prepare for the 20 questions that were shared here. The open-ended question at the end of this list, what's the most important thing that a PM does that people don't realize, is the kind of question where most candidates stumble because they haven't actually thought about it. So think about it. What is your genuine answer for that question? What do you believe the role is really about based on your experience or your observation of people who do this work really well? A thoughtful, personal answer to that question is probably one of the most memorable things that you can say in a PM interview. Now, if you made it through all 20 questions, you now have a clearer picture of what IT project management interviews actually test. Not just these surface level questions that everyone prepares for, but the ones that reveal whether you actually understand how projects actually operate. And here's what I want you to take away from this now. The candidates who get hired for IT PM roles are not always the ones with the most certifications. They're not always the ones with the longest resumes. They're the ones who can walk into that room and demonstrate that they understand the complexity of the work and that they have the judgment to manage it. That is a learnable skill, and it comes from studying real environments, asking good questions, and building the kind of practical understanding that makes your answers land differently than everyone else who walked through that door. You now have 20 questions, the frameworks behind them, and the mindset to approach the interview the right way. Use it. And if this was useful to you, like and subscribe to this video. I put out content specifically for people who are working towards a project management career and want to understand what that path actually looks like. And drop a comment below with the question that you find the hardest to answer, and I'll do my best to answer it for you. I'll see you on the next video.